Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and welcome to the breaking news. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. Today we have breaking news coming from around the world, as we have been able to hear the Republic of Poland will now be responding to the Zapad 2025 military exercises with a military exercise of their own called Iron Defender, involving 30,000 Polish armed forces directly along the Russian-Belarusian border. Meanwhile, we have also been able to hear of explosions inside of Western Tehran as air raid sirens have begun to sound, although it's unclear at the moment exactly what is happening inside of Western Iran or why the air raid sirens are being sounded. Some rumors online are circling that is a continuation of Israeli Air Force activities against the Islamic Republic of Iran, although that cannot be confirmed at the moment. The Yemeni Houthis have also apparently tried to conduct airstrikes against the state of Israel, but have fallen short quite literally, as two ballistic missile motors failed in the middle of their flight and landed short inside of Saudi Arabia. In the meantime, we have also been able to hear that the Turkish Republic's armed forces are now amassing in the area of northern Cyprus, and according to a direct quote from the president of Turkey, Erdogan, he has stated that they are conducting this armed buildup as a hostile sign against the state of Israel and their continued actions within the region. Nevertheless, the Axis powers of the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, the Republic of India, and North Korea are continuing their meeting inside of Beijing, as we have been able to hear that the Russians and Chinese are furthering their economic cooperation by opening a new Trans-Siberian pipeline connecting the two countries quite physically in their gas links and economic logistical infrastructure. We have also been able to hear that Putin, in the midst of this meeting today, did admit to deliberately attacking and striking key Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Meanwhile, in the United States of America, we've continued to see that the empanada eater, Nicolas Maduro, has continued to deploy further missile boats, which were purchased from the Islamic Republic of Iran, as a sign of retaliation against the United States of America. We have also been able to hear that the President of the United States has continued to implement more sanctions on Iran, with rumors today that the Department of Defense will be renamed to the Department of War. We've also been able to hear inside of Europe that it appears that the United States of America is continuing to conduct maritime patrols within the Baltic Sea, as the Russian Federation has continued to build up for a new offensive inside of Ukraine, with Ukrainian forces today counterattacking southwest of Berkhovsk and retaking the town of Udachne. Fuel shortages are beginning to worsen, with the Luhansk region and Saratov oblasts now showing that they are completely without fuel. We have a major amount of news to cover today, and we're going to be making sure to get into each and every single piece of this as much as we can. And so moving on into our major news of the day, we have been able to hear that there has finally been a NATO response to the upcoming Zapad 2025 military exercises that the Russian Federation and Belarus are conducting directly along the northwestern border of Belarus, near to the town of Grodno. The Russian military exercise, Zapad 2025, is expected to be 110,000 strong, with a large amount of those ground forces being based inside the Kaliningrad Oblast and inside of Grodno. If you look on the map here, you can actually see that this is surrounding a 35-mile wide stretch of open ground that connects Lithuania and Poland, known as the Suwalki Gap. This force is such a large one that it actually is believed that with the element of surprise, this force could advance forwards into the Suwalki Gap, taking it most likely within the first 48 hours, meeting very little resistance, and largely besieging the Baltics if this action was to be taken. This has been setting off alarm bells throughout the entirety of the European Union and NATO at large, with the European Union's Council stating that this could be a prelude to an actual armed invasion or an attempted armed invasion by the Russian Federation. Many in the West, including this channel, have continued to state that whether this becomes an armed invasion or not, Western countries need to show a solidified sign that they will not leave these military exercises unanswered, and that we would conduct military exercises of our own. The Republic of Poland is now doing just that, declaring the Iron Defender 2025 military exercise is soon to take place. This will be the largest military exercise of the year inside the Republic of Poland, involving around 30,000 Polish and Allied troops and 600 pieces of equipment, including self-propelled guns, tanks, and other forms of vehicular equipment. We do understand that this is an all-encompassing exercise and will continue until the end of September, meaning that these forces will be directly along the borders of the Russian Federation in Kaliningrad and Belarus throughout the entire duration of the Zapad 2025 military exercise. Speaking in military terms, one usually wants to see that on the defense, the enemy only has a 3-to-1 attacking advantage. In most modern warfare scenarios, overwhelming numbers generally do account for a decent amount of one's offensive capabilities, outside of that of air superiority. With this in mind, most attacking forces usually look for a ratio, an attacking ratio, greater than 3 to 1 or 5 to 1 against their enemy. For this reason, if the Russian Federation truly does have a 115,000 strong force inside of Kaliningrad and Grodno, this means that the Polish Iron Defender 2025 military exercise is perfectly meeting that 3 to 1 attackers ratio, meaning that Poland would be able to conduct a significant enough defense and hold off the Russians from completely besieging the Suwalki Gap for a long enough amount of time for the rest of NATO to be able to respond and come to Poland's aid. This is a significant move and is once again showing that the Republic of Poland will not only stand up for its own sovereignty, but is also making sure to directly counter the upcoming Zapad 2025 military exercises, something that is only days away and is continuing to concern a great deal of Western analysts and top officials throughout the entirety of Europe. Outside of that, we have also been able to hear that there have been explosions inside of Western Iran, an incredibly interesting occurrence, considering that this is something that happens a lot. We don't know who's doing it, it's the Mossad, but we also do know at the same time that these explosions have been something that have been occurring throughout the country. The one thing that makes these interesting, however, is that there was actually the sound of air raid sirens going off and the firing of air defense systems, such as ground-based anti-air defense guns, within the area of Western Tehran. This is something that is making us believe that this may be some sort of an airstrike of some kind, but what kind of airstrike is a little bit unclear. We actually have not been able to hear any confirmation, either by the Israelis or the United States of America, of continued military action against the Iranians, and considering that those sorts of announcements are made usually within minutes after a strike, and it's now been about 3 hours after these explosions were reported, it's a little bit mysterious as to why these were happening, what they were targeting, at least at the moment, and who would have been responsible for these attacks, at least for now. Of course, the likely suspects for this sort of attack would highly likely be the State of Israel and a more unlikely candidate of the United States of America. But we'll have to continue to wait and see as more details come out about the situation to see what exactly happened inside of the Islamic Republic of Iran and what was specifically targeted within Western Tehran. We also were able to hear that in the meantime, the Islamic Republic of Iran's proxy forces, the Yemeni Houthis, have attempted to try and fire a couple of other ballistic missiles at the Israelis. Generally, the Houthi tactics could best be described as spitballing. They take a little ballistic missile, they put it inside of a straw, and they spit it at the Israelis. They do that about once every few days, and so far they've never successfully hit any targets inside of Israel. They just kind of angered the Israelis a little bit. This resulted in the Israelis airstriking them a couple of days ago and killing their prime minister and most of their illegally elected civilian government, which appears to have angered the Houthis a little bit extra. As a response to this, it appears that the Yemeni Houthis have now fired 2 ballistic missiles today, which fell short and landed inside of Saudi Arabia. It appears that the Houthis may be having some sort of a missile dysfunction, and we have heard that they are looking into trying to cure this ailment or matter for the larger part, as this is the first time that we've actually ever heard of any Iranian-supplied ballistic missiles being given to the Houthis that appear to be non-functional, or the best way to describe it as dysfunctional. But moving on from that news pertaining to the State of Israel, we have also been able to hear that the relationship between the Republic of Turkey and the State of Israel is continuing to deteriorate in a fairly interesting way, as Turkey is now building up its armed forces within northern Cyprus from 40,000 men to 100,000 men, citing a growing threat from the State of Israel. This is a fairly interesting scenario, as Turkey is a NATO state, and the State of Israel is generally a U.S.-backed country. This means that there's about to be a possible clash, although it's highly unlikely due to the sort of relationship that both countries have with the United States, between the two. And the Turks are continuing to force posture in a way that is incredibly hostile towards the State of Israel. We're not exactly sure what's going to come out of this, and generally a conflict between the two would not be beneficial for either, as we would generally understand that at that point, the United States would most likely intervene in a diplomatic sense and most likely support the Israelis for certain reasons. But nevertheless, moving on out of the Middle East and on into Beijing, we have also been able to hear inside of the Republic of China that the meeting of what we are now dubbing the Axis powers, which is the Russian Federation, the Chinese, the North Koreans, Iran, India, and so on, are continuing their meeting ahead of the military parade that is planned inside of Beijing. We have been able to hear that a significant significant gas pipeline deal was made between the two countries today, as Russia and China have both signed this deal to build a new Siberian gas pipeline. As many people know around the world, the Russian Federation is already having a difficult time in exporting its natural gases to the European Union, which was its largest customer before the war. The Ukrainians have blown up the only pipeline that is still operational at this moment, which is the Druzhba pipeline, which transports natural gas through Belarus, some parts of the state of Ukraine, and on into the areas of Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary, which from there it can be transported further throughout the rest of Europe, making Russia a great deal of money. Generally, most countries find the European market to be one of the most advantageous, as it is one of the most voracious economies in terms of appetite for liquefied natural gas, or natural gases in general, and they also are one of the largest buyers in terms of purchasing power that purchases this kind of natural gas. However, considering that Europe seems to be distancing itself in the future from the Russian Federation, even if the Russians try to thaw their relationship with Europe after the war, it seems that the Russians are having to find new purchasing partners, and the People's Republic of China is probably the next best bet. The People's Republic of China does not have the kind of purchasing power that the European Union has. The European Union has a combined gross domestic product of about $24 trillion. The People's Republic of China only has a gross domestic product of about $18 trillion. Nevertheless, it's the only close substitute that can be found, and we're already seeing that the Russians are trying to team up with the Chinese to build the kind of pipeline infrastructure necessary to make sure that this natural gas pipeline would end up becoming an absolute cash cow. We're expecting that this will most likely be the future of Russia's resource exportation, will most likely be in the Chinese markets, because while they still buy at a lower price than European markets, it is a more consistent substitute, and considering the strategic relationship now growing between the two, we would highly expect that this economic relationship, unlike the European one, will never really be hampered or delayed in any sort of a major way that would cause significant financial burden to the Russian Federation. At the same time, we also were able to hear that Putin admitted striking Ukrainian infrastructure in this interview today, which you can actually see right here. Putin stated that the Ukrainians struck Russian energy infrastructure first, and that's the only reason that they responded. But anyone who's been following this channel since the beginning of the war would know that the Russian Federation literally hit Ukrainian power plants within the first hour of the armed invasion of Ukraine, which generally throws us out the window because you really can't get quicker than the first hour of a war in striking someone's energy infrastructure, and it generally removes the defensive explanation that Putin is giving at this point inside of Beijing as to why Ukrainian infrastructure continues to be targeted. On top of that, Putin made it incredibly clear in that interview that they targeted Ukrainian energy infrastructure leading into the winter, hoping that Ukrainian citizens would freeze to death in the midst of the winter. This is generally considered to be a crime against humanity by many, and while it could be clarified as some sort of an extent of total war, messing with energy infrastructure in the middle of winter with the threat of people freezing to death in the middle of a cold winter month is something that generally isn't looked that great anymore in The Hague or the Geneva Conventions. Moving on from that, however, and back towards Europe, we have also been able to hear that the United States of America is conducting maritime patrols within the area of the Baltic Sea, most likely a part of Operation Sentry, which has been conducted by NATO forces in this area for months. We have also been able to hear inside of Moscow that Igor Girkin, a former general of the Donetsk People's Republic, a Russian puppet state which arose during the Donbass crisis of 2014, has stated this about the war, largely stating that the war has failed. It's a disgrace. We didn't break through a single section of the front over the summer. In 16 months, we completed the assault on Chasiv Yar, and at the same time, Ukraine allowed young people to travel abroad. If Ukraine were on its last legs, they would have already started conscripting 16-year-olds, but they're doing well. So it generally appears that Girkin is no longer a big fan of the Russian Federation or the war effort for that large part, and it does appear that he's got some pretty reasonable points to believe that. Generally, probably because a lot of his prison guards, which would be overlooking him right now in prison, probably aren't showing up to work due to a lack of gas. Gas shortages are continuing to increase throughout the entirety of the Russian Federation, a situation that's been tracked for nearly a year at this point, but finally over the past few weeks, we are really starting to see that the Russians are running out of gas. The Russian Federation is attempting to lop off from gas supplies the extremities that they find the least important, and so far we've seen that that's included Crimea, the occupied regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia, as well as some of the southern regions, like the puppet states of West Abkhazia and South Ossetia inside of Georgia. And we've even been able to see that far in the east, near Primorsky Krya Oblast, home to the city of Vladivostok, Russian fuel supplies have run out there, along with the Kuril Islands, just to name a few. We're now seeing that this is reaching more into the heart of where the Russian Federation's armed forces are currently operating in Ukraine, as we're getting more proof that the entirety of the Luhansk Oblast is without any kind of gasolines of all octanes. You can actually see in this video here, the line of cars waiting at this gas station is quite literally over 100. And we do understand that every octane of commercial gasoline is now unavailable inside of the entirety of the Luhansk Oblast. This is due to Ukrainian drone strikes knocking out 25% of Russian oil refining capabilities over just the past few months alone, and considering that the Russians have been in a fuel deficit due to Ukrainian oil infrastructure attacks for the large majority of the war, this is now finally culminated in the Russian Federation running out of any amount of usable fuel product. On top of that, we also understand that now, for the first time ever in Western Russia, within the heartland of the Russian Federation itself, the Saratov Oblast is also running out of fuel as well. This is probably the most shocking development that we've seen so far, as from what we have been able to note and observe, it appears that the Russian Federation is strategically cutting off fuel resources to the least important areas of the Russian Federation, which generally are its extremities, the illegally occupied territories in Ukraine and Georgia, or even in the Far East, where very little economic activity is conducted. This is the first time in several weeks, or really at all, that we have seen that the Russian Federation now has a major fuel shortage directly within the heartland of the Russian Federation, within the European region. This is something that is incredibly significant because without the availability of gasolines, and in the future, as we're now noting, the complete lack of diesel within some occupied areas, most economic activity in the Russian Federation is going to grind to a halt. And as a result of that, a large amount of supplies currently available to the Russian consumer will begin to skyrocket in cost due to the artificial lack of goods due to the lack of an ability to transport them. We also understand that this will start to cause significant issues in practically every single facet of life, including the agricultural industry, and considering that these fuel shortages are coming up right before the fall, this can end up having a apocalyptic sort of an outcome, especially considering that a large amount of Russian farms are already on the verge of bankruptcy, and that the Russian Federation only 2 weeks ago issued a moratorium on the bankruptcies for Russian farmers. If these farmers cannot afford fuel due to its skyrocketing cost, or if there is no fuel available, they will not be able to operate their agricultural machinery to conduct this fall's harvest. If that is the case, we could see that a crippling and endemic lack of fuel, as well as crops, may start to permeate throughout the entirety of the Russian Federation and cause an even greater crisis, most likely akin to a famine. Some experts are already starting to point out that that is a risk, especially for next harvest season in the next year of 2026, but at this moment right now, it appears that we may already start to see some cracks in that agricultural system because of the fuel shortage happening right now. We also have been able to hear, as an extent of that while fuel shortages are continuing to worsen throughout the Russian Federation and the economic situation is rather grim, the Russian Federation is already beginning for a second offensive in the Donbass, specifically within Donetsk, this year. We've been able to hear that the Russian VDV brigades, which their performance hasn't really been the greatest through the war, are being moved into the area, and they're apparently going to be trying to conduct possible airdrops of the VDV inside of Donetsk. As many people know, anytime that the VDV has been airdropped anywhere in the war, they get slaughtered pretty badly. We're not really expecting that this is going to work. We don't know if this is some sort of a desperate last ditch by the Russian army to try and take the Donbass, but this is most likely not going to turn out too well. But we'll have to wait and see how it goes. We do know at the moment, however, that the last Russian offensive, which just wound out about a week ago, is already starting to lose ground, as Ukrainian armed forces southwest of Pokrovsk today were able to liberate the town of Udachne, a fairly significant town near to one of the highways just south of Pokrovsk. The retaking of this village is a somewhat significant one, as it does show that the 425th Assault Regiment, which also has conducted an effective encirclement of about 40,000 Russian men near to the area of Fedorivka, are still conducting a fairly decent amount of offensive actions in most specific areas around the flanks of the city of Pokrovsk, and to continue to show that Russian defensive lines are somewhat weak. And while the Russians can go for weeks or months at a time conducting major offensives, it doesn't really appear that really manifests itself in any sort of a manageable way where the Russians can defend their line and defend the ground that they just took. So it does appear that the Russians are having some continued difficulties there. Meanwhile, we have also been able to hear in the United States of America that they are continuing to implement further sanctions on Iran-related shipping networks and freight forwarders. It does appear that the Islamic Republic of Iran will be incredibly sad for that. We know that they are a big fan of Temu. And we also were able to see that in the meantime, Venezuela actually did purchase some of those Temu Iranian boats before they got cut off from additional U.S. sanctions today. As we were able to see a picture published by the Venezuelan Armed Forces showing them moving out a Zulfiqar-class fast attack craft. This thing can best be described as a fishing boat that has an anti-ship missile attached to it. I generally would not believe that this will be competent at all in a real wartime scenario, because we've actually seen similar vessels like these go up against the U.S. Navy during Operation Praying Mantis, and that didn't really end up too well. We're also expecting that this boat will have a very small amount of time to survive, considering that the entirety of Second Fleet is quite powerful right now in the Caribbean. We have about 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, one, let's see here, what is the name? Ticonderoga. I don't know why I'm going to call it the Tomahawk class, but the Ticonderoga-class missile cruiser, along with the USS America, which is an LHD, and 2 amphibious support vessels. Generally not the kind of force that you want to mess with a speedboat that has an anti-ship missile attached to it. But the Venezuelans, they do trifle, and they will continue to, most likely, into the future. Nevertheless, that is all of the major news that we have today. I've got to thank you all so much once again for watching, and if y'all do enjoy, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and support us on Patreon. The link is in the description below. For the price of a cup of coffee or a cup of coffee a month, which is about $5, you can actually help us to continue to make these kinds of video projects possible. All you have to do is click on the link in the description below, and it will take you straight to Patreon. I have to give a massive shout out to all of our patrons who currently are supporting us over there, and I also have to say a huge thanks to everyone just for watching this video and giving your time to hear another major news update from the Enforcer channel. And so with that, we will see you all tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours of news from around the world, or we will see you in the next short war summary, whichever you prefer. But nevertheless, a big thanks to all of y'all once again for watching, and we will see you in the next one.